Who knew something as small as a wing mirror could turn an entire race on its head? Alright, so there was a lot of drama during that race that we have to get through, but I want to start this video peacefully and do just a little bit of gloating. Kick Sauber will score a point by the time the season finishes. I don't know how, I don't know when, but all I know is that it will happen. Bookmark it right now. Lads, never doubt my ability to predict the future. I just knew these guys sooner or later would get some luck, and they finally did. They had solid pace all weekend and found themselves in the right position at the right time. I'm really happy for Joe, honestly. Most of the season he's been getting clowned on for being consistently last, but this weekend when points were on the line, he decided to become prime Ayrton Senna. He wasn't playing. At the same time, I also wish Bottas got a few as well, but at least he's no longer last in the driver's standings anymore. Sauber were able to take advantage of a chaotic Qatar Grand Prix. A race weekend that was full of drama, left, right and centre. First things first, we got to talk about the Verstappen-Russell beef. All throughout qualifying, those two were going band for band, taking turns at the top of P1 all session long. The W15 was looking extremely quick, and Red Bull somehow managed to turn their car from a midfielder in the sprint to fastest in just a few hours. It was genuinely very entertaining watching all the drivers pushing to the absolute limit, trying to find every possible advantage they could. And just keep in mind that last part, because in Q3, George pulled off one of the cheapest shots I've seen in a while. Before the final set of runs, most people were on a cooldown lap, including Russell. And going through this high-speed section of the track, him and Max come across each other. Now the steward said that Max was driving unnecessarily slowly and handed him a one-place grid drop, which me personally made no sense because neither driver was on a push lap. But what also made this escalate a lot further was how two-faced George was being. The incident itself looked like a pretty clear-cut case of Russell trying to screw over Verstappen. I mean, in theory, now drivers can just speed up, drive right up to the back of another car, and cry over the radio about impeding. And I know the ruling wasn't actually related to impeding, but let's be honest here, that's what George was looking for. It's the F1 equivalent of diving and going, "Ref, where's the foul?" Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Max is a saint either. I mean, he too was admitted to doing things intentionally to screw others over. But at least he's upfront about it. What you see is what you get with Verstappen, which I can appreciate. George, on the other hand, was being slimy. He was taking inspiration from Christian Horner, and Max wasn't having any of it. During the post-qualifying press conferences, this guy was acting all friendly and saying it wasn't a big deal, only to switch up in the steward's room completely, and I assume overly exaggerate the severity of what Max did, which you can imagine ticked the dude off. But these guys must not have learned their lesson from Brazil, because Verstappen is the last person you want to get on the wrong side of. As he was leaving, he told them directly that he would take the place back into turn 1. And from that moment, I just knew Max was going to bulldoze his way to first no matter what, which he did and never looked back. Also, apparently, he confronted Russell in the steward's room and said something along the lines of, "You and your FIA mates, I hope you're happy with what you've done." Which is kind of ironic coming from Max's mouth, but let me not say anymore. I swear, whenever these two get into a spat, it's always so entertaining. Remember back to 2023, that was the only race all year where I saw Max genuinely get pissed off. And those sentiments about George being two-faced were the same then as they are now. I don't think I've seen Verstappen publicly call anyone out like this since Ocon in Brazil 2018. George is really one of his biggest ops. Like I said before though, I'd genuinely love to see these two in a championship battle. It would actually be fireworks. Anyway, drama aside and onto the racing, Max was brilliant once again. He was determined to win. He had a great getaway and controlled the race perfectly. Put simply, it was a vintage performance from Verstappen. The Red Bull also looked in a way better place. They managed to find a nice setup window after the sprint that turned their fortunes around completely. Russell was also on it all weekend, looking to build on his win in Vegas, only for his race to be ruined at the first pit stop. Being the guinea pig during the first stint always sucks, especially if a tyre compound hasn't been used all weekend. He got stuck behind Alonso for absolutely ages, then the punctures for Carlos and Lewis brought him back into contention, and after that, he didn't make any overtakes other than this one on Gasly. And touching on that point, this track has to be one of the worst on the calendar for racing. Turn 1 was pretty much the only opportunity, and even that was still difficult without a big pace advantage. That's why taking the lead at the start was so crucial for Max. And going into Abu Dhabi, I'm 100% certain that he's going to do the same thing to prove a point. Just make sure you do it to the right Mercedes please though, leave Lewis out of this, because my guy is already going through enough. Being a Lewis Hamilton fan in 2024 has to be a social experiment, bro. It wasn't supposed to end this way, man. From the outside, it almost seems as though Lewis feels like a stranger at that team. The team he once called his family. All he wanted was to finish on a high note, but that's not the way things have gone. My guy desperately needs that change of environment because that love for Mercedes seems to have completely fizzled out. A lot of things went wrong. The false start, the puncture, the car was undrivable, speeding in the pit lane, but at least we got this nice wheel-to-wheel racing from him and Leclerc in the sprint. A sign of things to come? Maybe. But while we're talking about Charles, I gotta say, this man is not giving up on P2 in the Drivers' Championship. If he actually does this with the car he's had for most of the year, that would be some accomplishment. He has easily been a top 2 driver this year. Ferrari now need to overcome a 21-point deficit to win the Constructors, which seems unlikely. But at the same time, I got some hope. Something crazy will happen in Abu Dhabi. It would be a nice send-off for Carlos before he heads to Williams, and an amazing reward for the team who, for most of this season, haven't had the fastest car. On average, it's been about 3rd and a few times 4th fastest, or worse. And don't remind me of Canada to Silverstone, we don't talk about that. Nonetheless, they have 2 competitive drivers consistently bringing in solid points. Charles particularly was so elite in Qatar. His defending against Piastri was superb, giving us a perfect segue into McLaren's weekend. Lando did what was best for the team, and it was a nice show of sportsmanship and all, but I better not see any of this woke nonsense next year. They're starting from a clean slate in 2025, so I hope it's every driver for himself. As for the race, Piastri was stuck behind George for a while, but since he's a chill guy minding his business, he managed to finish on the podium through all the chaos. Lando almost took the lead at turn 1, held on to Verstappen for most of the race, but missed the double waved yellows and got a 10-second stop-go penalty, which initially I thought, that's pretty unfair. But then I realised that Kimi Raikkonen got the same penalty for the same offence in Spa 2017, as well as Mazepin and Latifi in Austria 2021. So the penalty was correct in that sense, but if they really deemed that wing mirror to be a massive safety hazard, they should have just either thrown a VSC or safety car straight away. Which is the role of the race director, who right now is Rui Marquez, who came in just last race in place of Niels Vittich, who was fired. And to be fair, his decision making in Brazil was horrific, but axing him with just 3 races to go was just weird. Usually what happens is they wait until the end of the season to find a new race director and then give them time to prepare during pre-season. Putting in a new one without even letting the drivers know in advance was always going to cause a lot of chaos. But that's the Bentalion way of conducting things, ladies and gentlemen. And don't you dare try and question him, otherwise there will be consequences. I don't know about you, but whenever I hear this guy open his trap to start yapping, the more I'm convinced he's a narcissist. I laughed so hard when he was like, well, I was a driver too, so I get what these guys are going through. And this is him driving an F1 car. Ah, shoot. I know I said driving, I meant to say crashing. But unfortunately, he can do whatever he wants. He's literally the president of the damn organization. Honestly, I've always had bad vibes about this guy, ever since he started targeting Lewis in 2022. And it's becoming increasingly clear that someone needs to get this guy gone. There seems to be a massive disconnect between the FIA and Formula 1 at the moment. The drivers and the teams are simply asking for a bit of transparency. But this dude is hell-bent on dictating the whole show and imposing his power over everyone. I'm curious to see though who loses their job first, him or Checo. Because genuinely, what was he doing? The bar has never been so low. He has to be reminded now that green literally means go. I'm pretty sure now though, it's a wrap. He'll either announce his retirement sometime this week or be fired from Red Bull once and for all. This season, he single-handedly stopped the team from winning the Constructors. And here's a crazy stat. If Checo doesn't score 9 or more points in Abu Dhabi, he'll have less points than Alonso did in the 2014 Ferrari. Yeah, the car that was infamous for oversteering and understeering at the same time. And that's with more races and more points available too. Bro, it's actually about time. But who's going to replace him? Well, most likely an AlphaTauri driver. Probably will be Lawson since Marco just prefers him over Yuki. But we'll see. One thing is for certain though, they are no longer interested in Colapinto, who over the past few races has had a bit of a rough patch. He got tangled up in a crash with Hülkenberg and Ocon at the start, which wasn't his fault. And speaking of the Frenchman, Alpine have handled this departure horrendously. This is nothing against Pierre because I think he's been performing incredibly well recently, but before Esteban announced he'd be signing with Haas, he was consistently the better of the two. And now, all of a sudden, he's like a second slower than his teammate. Not to mention how they're not even giving him a proper send-off, and just throwing Doohan into the car for the final race. For someone who has been with the team for 5 years and won their only race in the last decade, the disrespect is just crazy. Anyway, it's Alpine's loss. They fumbled 3 supremely talented drivers in the span of just 2 years. Having said that though, Sunday was a big win. Gasly's P5 has almost secured them P6 in the Constructors. Haas are going to have to pull off a masterclass in Abu Dhabi to overturn those 5 points. Aston Martin are secure in P5, but these past few races haven't reflected that. Were it not for Alonso driving the wheels off that car, I don't know where this team would be. Since Stroll was out here doing this to Albon, the man whose wing mirror started this whole sequence of events that led to what turned out to be a very messy Grand Prix. Apart from positions in the Constructors' Championship, there's not too much left to fight for now. The 2 main fights being McLaren v Ferrari and Alpine v Haas. Besides that, the F2 Championship is going to be decided this weekend, and I'm pretty gassed for that. And also, many drivers will be saying their goodbyes. Some from their teams, and others from Formula 1 as a whole. Bottas will be gone. Same with Zhou. This might be the last we see of Colapinto as well. K-Mag will also be leaving for good. Carlos is departing from the Scuderia, and of course, Lewis and Mercedes, which will be a bittersweet farewell. some tears might be shed, or he'll be dancing into Maranello listening to Kendrick's new album. And on that note, let me know what your favourite song is if you've listened to it. If not, let me know what you thought about the race direction, about the race itself, literally anything you want. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like, share it around with friends, and subscribe to the channel if you're new to get my latest videos in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.